How's that? Yeah, so thank you, everyone. Firstly, apologies from Michelle Edge, the Osprey Chief Executive, who would like to have been here herself to deliver this presentation, but she wasn't able to fit it within her schedule, which I suspect has got even busier today with the developments over mycoplasma. So what I'll do is basically over the next 40-odd minutes, I'll just cover 4 key topics of pertinence to the industry and our involvement with the industry, that's Ospreys. So I'll give you a brief update of the TB program and a little bit of the history. I will talk about the movement to a risk-based framework for surveillance or testing. I'll talk about the DEAR TB testing contract changes, which were implemented yesterday. I'll give a brief overview of the NAIT program review, and then if there's time left, we'll do some questions and answers here. So first topic, just a TB program update. So I think the first thing to remember, a little bit different than our disease of the day at the moment, is that bovine TB control in New Zealand has been a very, very long journey for at least 100 plus years. And it's gone through various milestones along that pathway. It's been under active management to various degrees since the 1950s, through to industry management and takeover of managing the program in the mid to late 1990s. You'll see at the, is this a pointer? Oops, sorry. Oh. Yeah. The, is there a, oh no, it doesn't matter. You'll see at our peak there, that at our peak period, there were over 1,700 infected herds in New Zealand at the June 1994. That's now down to less than 40 just last month. But again, it's been a very long journey. Yeah. So just a little bit of a background to how the program is managed. So the Biosecurity Act itself was passed in 1993, and that replaced multiple national statutes that were dealing with national programs, the Animals Act and various other ones. It introduced the concept of national pest management strategies or plans at both national and regional level. But most importantly, it introduced the concept of management agencies, and that included the possibility of non-government body corporates running and managing a national animal health or control program with essentially the same powers and responsibilities and the ability to raise funds as a core government agency. That's quite unique legislation in the world, actually, yeah. So there's a legislative hierarchy about how the a program is implemented under that. So basically, as I said, there's the Biosecurity Act for a national pest management plan that then requires a national operational plan or an order in council, which creates obligations and legal objectives, and then that leads into a national operational plan for the day-to-day activities. So in the history of New Zealand since industry under the Biosecurity Act started managing or taking over the ownership of TB control in New Zealand, there's been a series of national pest management plans or strategies. Each of them has had their own specific objectives and different time frames. So basically the first stage was stabilising a situation that New Zealand had leading up to that point, then achieving what is called international country freedom, disease freedom, which is a low level below which it's believed that trade implications for livestock disease are not an issue. The next phase was the proof of concept that total TB eradication was possible. At that stage, it wasn't believed that there was confidence for the country to do it holus bolus. So funders and stakeholders said prove the concept. That was done, and that's led to the fourth and should be the final stage or leg of our journey, which is going for the total biological eradication of the bovine tuberculosis bacterium from New Zealand. But it's a long stage program. So what's been achieved? So basically that is, in one slide, that's about a 40-year history of TB control in New Zealand, or basically a 50-year history. So, and if anyone has had a look, I guess, on the MPI website to see the ever-increasing daily spots of mycoplasma, Things like this need to give industries some hope. As you can see, the situation that was developing New Zealand in the 80s to the 90s, similar pattern. People basically thought, this is the end of the industry. This is not possible to do anything about. But what this is a wonderful story to show that with the will, good science, good knowledge, good funding, collaborative programs, good support, that even what is considered probably very, very difficult or impossible at a time is possible. Now the reason, So again, that's showing that in sort of pictures. So that, and certainly that is the situation in New Zealand on the left of the individual infected herds in New Zealand at the beginning of the decade of the 2000s. And again, that is not the peak. That is, that's 700 infected herd. At the peak, you add another 1,000 herds on top of that. You would have appreciated the, if you like, the situation that New Zealand looked like it was in with bovine tuberculosis. And that is the situation just last month, and in this month we've even been able to clear 3/4 of those spots out of the North Island, so now there's only 3 spots left there. So from where we've come from, it's a pretty major achievement. And I think, as I said, that anyone that is contemplating, if you like, the dark days of any new emerging disease, I think this should give people hope. So basically, how do we currently control TB? It's a lot of it is the same as we've done since the wildlife problem was determined to be a main driver for the ecology and epidemiology of TB in New Zealand. Basically what we call our 3-legged stool. There's 3 strands to the program. Disease control or management of our infected herds, movement restrictions, and we add the 3rd component here of wildlife control. The 2 on the bottom, the 2 legs, are basically what other jurisdictions have done around the world to deal with their problem. We've had the unique situation, along with probably Great Britain, that when you throw a wildlife vector into the mix, you have to develop strategies for that. But that is what New Zealand has done. It's done a massive science investment to figure out what's needed to be done and then put it in place. So basically our final phase, as I said, our final step in our very, very long journey, but it's 25, again, it is another long stage. It is for the total eradication of TB, the bacterium from New Zealand, but it has milestones along the way. And that has been a difference and I guess an advantage of the TB program in New Zealand from its inception, is the development of staged objectives. As I said, it's a bit of a cliche, but you can't eat the elephant at once. You've got to actually create realistic goals along the way. Basically, our milestones are removing what we call TB freedom from getting the disease out of our domestic herds by 2026, which is not that far away. It was 10 years when we started this. Now it's just over 8 years, so that's basically our measure. That'll be no infected herds in New Zealand at 30 June 2026, and that's sustainably clear. The next phase of that will be removing the bacteria from our possum population. That's a further another 15 years after that. And then going for total biological eradication of TB from New Zealand. You might think that's impossible. Australia did it. But again, it was a long program there. The difference between 2040 and 2055, that 15 years, is to allow a mopping up period for basically any residual infection that's left in basically long-living wildlife species, or mopping up those bits that are left. And through all of that, there'll be a change to a more risk-based approach to TB control and testing. Basically, we just produce some pretty simple graphics to display our goals. As I said, 2026 for livestock freedom, 2040 for possums, and 2055 for the bug, totally gone from New Zealand. Over that period, we've set, for those 2 milestones, we've set targets, and these are based on models, bottoms up and top down for the second one. Basically, projections of how we will see our infected herds reducing from the start of our program, which was 43, to basically 0 in 25-26. So these are targets that are basically set. They're actually set in one of our legislative instruments, our National Operational Plan, and then we will report actuals Again, those targets are based on a series of assumptions. We'll get actuals. If there's deviation from it either way, we'll be testing those assumptions. For wildlife TB freedom by 2040, possum TB freedom by 2040, our proxy measure for that is the hectares of area classed as TB vector risk. We started the plan with 8.2 million hectares. We'll be heading towards 0 hectares by 2040. This has been built from bottoms-up modelling by my field staff, my technical staff, and they've been quite bullish, thinking that they'll get there even earlier. But again, these targets are based on a series of assumptions which are stated. We'll get actual results, and those then will be, the assumptions will be tested. Just how the program is funded, which is a bit of an arm wrestle, I think, that you'll see in the media with what New Zealand eventually does with mycoplasma. But basically this is for the start of the plan. There was a 4-year funding profile set that the industry and government committed to, a total of 250 million, and then you'll see the division there, 60% industry, 40% government. Now that's over a 4-year period, and for the industry contribution of 150 million, you'll see on the the left-hand side, the different industry funding partners and their contributions towards that. Yeah, the percentages are those percentages of the whole. The white numbers on the left-hand side add up to 60%, the other 40% is the government contribution. Okay, so I mentioned that one of the phases, or one of the strategies that will be brought into this final phase, is a more risk-based approach to TB control, or surveillance, pest control, etc. So it's all to do with the fact that basically we're requiring to attempt to do this with basically do more and for less sort of funding. It's believed that we're probably doing precautionary overkill with the first phase of the strategy, so we'll be introducing a more risk-based approach. So what I'll do is I'll just briefly cover parts of testing. So the whole idea of what has been titled risk-based testing is implementing a new surveillance system or paradigm that's sufficiently sensitive to find the disease when it occurs to ensure that our TB plan objectives. So it's that balance between achieving what you need without overspending. So such a system, it'll reduce unnecessary TB testing, numbers and costs, but also impost on farmers. It also enables us to bring into the surveillance system alternative means of surveillance where on-farm testing's removed, and in this case I'm talking about slaughter surveillance at slaughter premises. It allows for TB risk to be assessed, recorded and managed at multiple levels, premises or farm level, cohort, consignment, right down to individual animals. The phase that we're getting with TB control now is that, and being a chronic disease very similar to human tuberculosis, when you're getting down to low levels, you're beginning to talk about an individual animal problem over time, not necessarily a cohort or consignment problem. But through all of this, it needs to be relatively simple and easy to understand and implement. But basically, a risk-based approach, it has, for testing or surveillance, has 3 components: area, residual risk, residual animal risk, and movement risk. So in some cases, the first component of that, we're already doing it. We already run a risk-based regime for TB testing in New Zealand, but that's purely around wildlife environmental risk. Basically, it's like, if you like, rings in a pond when you throw a stone into. It's more intensive in the centre, dissipates as you sort of go out. So this is basically around our so-called vector risk areas. The darker colours, the brown colours, are our most intensive, and going out with our lighter colours there. The darker colours are annual testing with the requirement of compulsory pre-movement testing, then going out to annual testing, older age groups, 2-yearly testing, and then 3-yearly testing. Thing is, with this paradigm is 3 years, you're stuck with 3 years. There's no lesser option after that, but this is where we want to go. So what does this result in, this testing in deer? Now, as you all know, deer, incredibly seasonal species, and there's times of the year where you can test and there's times you can't. And basically this is the pattern for our last 3 complete years of deer TB tests conducted per month. So really, really good in terms of our late, post the raw, basically through late autumn through to winter into spring, then a bit of a hiatus, and then picking up sort of late autumn again. Yeah. So for a surveillance sort of paradise, surveillance system, you might think, crikey dick, there's a big gap in the middle. But what we do now is if we add slaughter data into it, admittedly, okay, fair enough, different age groups, different cohorts, but it's still data that you're getting for an analysis of TB. So when you look at that, as I said, our hole that we had from testing in terms of seasonal patterns can be filled with slaughter data. And when you look at the numbers, and the numbers that we have through the NAIT system concur very, very well with industry slaughter data, and we believe that this is a reasonably good pattern. So basically there's about 300,000 deer, I think, in the years we're looking at, maybe a bit less now, that are basically killed through slaughter premises. And it's data that we don't actually get any visibility from at the moment, but we're looking at ways of remedying that. So basically for deer, if we combine different streams of data for surveillance, it creates a very, very good consistent picture. And because of this pattern that we see here, that gives us confidence that when we go to, and we'll talk about it soon, the full rollout of risk-based testing, provided we're getting sufficient sensitivity of meat inspection, we're confident that we can rely on that and be able to lessen the deer testing impost on farm way, way more than what we do at the moment. So we've created just a conceptual model of what risk-based testing would look like under those three components. It's a conceptual model, and there are key dependencies of it. So basically the first two we're looking at are basically our location. Our middle one is our middle line. Our middle row is our history risk, or a residual animal risk, and then the bottom one's a movement risk. So basically the action line in the middle is what we would sort of do. So just look at the top line. So basically where the location risk, where there's low or negligible wildlife risk, and some of the other things are controlled, as in movements, and we know that there are no residual risk problems within the herds, that in those cases we can reduce on-farm testing surveillance potentially to nil and rely totally on surveillance through slaughter premises. But that's entirely dependent on post-mortem inspection. We've done analysis, and we believe that provided the current MPI procedures are followed consistently by skilled and trained staff who are trained on an ongoing basis, it'll deliver equally as good sensitive detection of TB in a carcass as it would be on a farm. So location risk is higher. Retain our current policy, which is basically what we have there, but with the inclusion of potentially adding a risk status at animal level into NAIT. The herd history risk, this is residual risk or previous TB infection, and this is all about being able to put a flag against animals that they have been associated with infection in the past, a cohort or whatever, a herd, and then tracking them for their lifetime. So this is tracing it out. So basically this is entirely dependent, and that is why these words are in red. That is a key dependency on doing that, is basically the NAIT system being fully functional and being used to its appropriate level. And you only just need to be listening to the radio at the moment, and there's significant doubts about that. And lastly, the movement component of it, essentially the same sort of thing. Where the movement risk is high, we may implement post-movement testing at a frequency depending on the risk status of that. But again, that requires flags against animals and the reporting of movements from NAIT. And when the movement risk is low and all the other risk factors are low, moving to a surveillance paradigm of slaughter surveillance. So that's our simple model at the moment. As I said, there's some key dependencies there, which will dictate basically the timeline for implementation. So basically on the right, our red dot is our current state. And these are basically all the things that need to be done to go to a full rollout of the risk-based regime. NAIT integration, that is integrating TB data at both area and individual animal level into an animal's NAIT record, so it essentially becomes an individual animal database. there'll need to be some reviews of legislation, but a lot of this stuff will be coming out of the NAIT review, which we'll touch on soonish. Yeah. Then there's obviously got to be infrastructure changes, education. We may introduce a whole new concept of what herd status or groupings of animal status is about. Now that's changing a paradigm that's been in place and accepted in New Zealand for probably now 25 years. So you don't do that stuff quickly, and that'll be the ultimate sort of outcome there. So we've done some, I guess, modelling. So this is a pretty simple graphic, but this is our current numbers of deer tested at the moment. At the moment we're down, if you take the 2017 one, we're there or thereabouts, around about 150 odd, 160 odd thousand deer tested a year. That's a big reduction from 15 years ago, where we were testing 700,000 deer a year. And basically, so this is modelling projections of implementing that three-phased model over time. That will lead to a reduction in testing. So we're projecting, and this is quite conservatively, about a third reduction in the number of deer tested per annum, down to less than 100,000. Okay, so yes, the three out of our 4 points. Yes, so yesterday we implemented changes to basically a system for the procurement or the undertaking of deer testing, the biggest change that has been done since 1996 in New Zealand. So I guess why was this done? So it was part of the TB plan review, which was conducted in 2015-16, and that was an agreement with DINS to shift from the current user pays model to a testing program invested in and delivered nationally by Osprey, or TB Free New Zealand, which is the legal management agency of the TB program. Throughout the process, there was a review of various funding and procurement models that were undertaken by ourselves during July and August of 2017. The model chosen and then endorsed by our board was an open tender for deer TB testing services. Now, the intent to do this, after that board decision was made, was notified and socialised with various entities, DINS, at various stages with Deer Farmers Association, New Zealand Veterinary Association, and Assure Quality, who currently do, up until last week, they're already doing 50% of the deer testing market in New Zealand. A few people are surprised about that. And in some regions, it's even greater than that. They almost had a total growth of the market. And affected veterinary practices. They had to be accredited. They were in our system, so there were 44 individual vet practices involved with TB testing. They were all written specifically by us back in November last year. Then a request for tender proposal was put out into the market by Tenderlink late last year, and through a process, we're up to the point as in starting yesterday. So it's moving to basically a model where we commission testing services on a wider scale, and basically there'll be two testing companies or entities provided doing TB testing and funded by Osprey or via the TB plan, centrally funded and centrally delivered. Again, a lot of the background to that was to do with scale and what was considered the most efficient way to carry it. It was considered going to the market. It was better doing that than having individual negotiated contracts with about 50 separate entities. So there's 2 suppliers, Assure Quality, doing the whole of the North Island, West Coast, Targo and southern regions of the South Island, and the Veterinary Enterprises Company and their partner veterinary practice. I just emphasise that. That'll be doing the Canterbury region, Tasman and Marlborough regions of the South Island. The other component of this that is moving towards the model that we apply with cattle is that Osprey will take a more direct involvement with the management of deer TB reactors, animals deemed by our technical staff that have to be taken as TB reactors and disposed of. But the processes leading up to that determination remain unchanged. So skin test positive deer that were considered to be false reactivity is still eligible for blood testing, and it'll go through that process. So Osprey will manage the disposal of deer ultimately deemed to be TB reactors, similar to what we do with cattle. At the moment, we've looked at the data on that, and the majority of these, for the variety of reasons, particularly with the small numbers, are killed post-mortemed and disposed on farm. We see there really being no change in that. This provision, and it was under the National Operational Plan, this was in part of the consultation of the TB plan, there'll be TB reactor compensation available, similar to what there is in cattle. The valuation principles of what that might look like for deer are being finalised with DINS at the moment, and that's a requirement under the TB plan order, that the basis for which compensation is paid and levels of values and how it's assessed is to be determined by our industry shareholders. And valuation schedules, we're working through the process of getting those independently provided, as we do with cattle. At the moment, we get monthly schedules for cattle provided. We're in discussions with DINS and the current provider of valuations for cattle. We're looking at whether we can expand that into deer. There is a valuation disputes procedure. These are basically values set on commercial values. But in cattle, sometimes we get pedigree stock and things like that. So there is a separate process for people if they're not satisfied with the values that they've got to go through. And it's basically an arbitration or a mediation process. So finally on this bit, so just things to consider. So basically, with this, we've changed this, but there's really no change. You might see different people doing it. In a lot of cases, it's people that are already doing the work, so there will not be greenhorns doing the testing. There's no change in the way the TB testing's administered. One of the new requirements that we have is the requirement for RFID scanning, and that'll be at test read. Now, the reason for that is that these will become test results. At the moment, they're going to be stored separately, but ultimately, it'll be a test result recorded against the individual animal. And the intent is for that to be recorded against the individual animal as a treatment within its NAIT account, its NAIT record. So, testing arrangements, they need to be discussed with, you've seen the testing areas for deer farmers. Yeah, how testing's conducted, particularly if you've had a change. You need to be discussing this with your designated testers or with their management. As I said, both entities, Veterinary Enterprises and Assure Quality, have been in the deer testing game a long time. They might be working in different areas. In a lot of cases, they're working in the same areas they've always been, and you'll see no change in testers. But if they are new, you need to have a conversation before your test is due about things like timing, your facilities, needs for restraint, pre-clipping prior to testing. Those last 2 points, they're actually built into the cost of testing, but as letters have been sent to yourselves, things like pre-clipping, if you're doing it now, it's a good thing you can actually do to assist with the process. There is a requirement, now that these are contractors to Osprey, there is a requirement under the law, the Health and Safety and the Workplace Act law. We have obligations for contractor safety, so there is a requirement to provide a safe working environment for TB testers, but I'm sure the vast majority of you will do that now. And while we know that there's a change to assure quality, but this happens at the moment, if there's an intent to do other work while the animals are yarded, nothing changes with that. There's work that AQ don't do, so you just need to, if it's work that you're doing with your current vet, you just need to notify the testers of the intent, and they can change timing to a degree, and just to fit in, say you're just doing a single year. So essentially that stuff is really no different than what it should be now. If I've got a couple more minutes I can not do the NAIT review if that's okay, TB. Run out of time? Oh, well. So just sort of quickly, and this is sort of the issue at the moment, obviously with Mycoplasma bovis, but there is and this will probably accentuate the importance of this, and I don't think anyone will doubt about that. So there has been a program, and there's people in this room that actually know more about this than me because they've been on one or two of these committees at the below. So basically there has been a review of the NAIT program underway for a couple of years. A report was released by the Minister in April with the preliminary results of that, and that's a link to that. If anyone hasn't read that, please do. So it basically aims to evaluate and identify the opportunities to improve the program. I don't think anyone is in any doubt now if you aren't in doubt, you haven't been listening to the radio or looking at the TV. Yeah, there is opportunities to improve the program and its implementation, compliance, and general usability. So the review's been overseen by a steering committee with members from key industry associations and government agencies, and that's been supported by a technical user group, of which there are members I know in this room here. So basically, it isn't something that's just been discussed and deliberated by a group of bureaucrats in an airless room. There has been significant industry involvement with it. Yeah. So the key issues being considered are NAIT's performance, its uptake, and outcomes to date. Looking at there's wider and global, with the new and emerging drivers for the need for a proper traceability program, biosecurity and product integrity and market access. Looking at operational, legislative and policy issues, needs and priorities, and options to improve, the uptake of the program implementation, compliance and awareness. So I guess the situation that New Zealand's got itself in with, with the mycoplasma situation, particularly with calves, there's got to be, there's a variety of contributions to that, but within all this, there's got to be answers for that. So the review recommendations, I believe there are 38, but they basically fall into 5 sort of core themes. It's basically individually identified, locations of which then there's people on and animals move around them. Individually identified animals, and then responsibility of program users, the integrity of information recorded in NAIT, and how it can be used for traceability purposes. And we will be we're actually using it very, very intensively, and one of the farms we're using it on was mentioned before, for TB control purposes, where we have got chronic, within herd problems and large herds where they have multiple issues going on, particularly with non-specific reactivity. So lastly, what are the steps? So basically, anyone who's got an interest in it, particularly hopefully that interest has been piqued by what's happening daily at the moment, so you're encouraged to read that report. If you've got issues or gripes or whatever about how NAIT is structured, how it's implemented, the difficulty to use, please read this and please use the opportunity to have a chance of having your say. The timing of starting the public consultation of the reviews yet to be determined by the government. They are obviously a bit indisposed at the moment, but basically this is part and parcel of probably what is happening at the moment. So some of the recommendations that are operational in nature can probably be implemented under the existing NAIT Act without legislative change, but the government's going to announce a timeline and recommendations for anything like that. So thank you for that. And I don't know whether I've probably used up all the time, but there's...
I think it's important that there are questions out there.
Yep. Just not... So I am staying tonight. I'll be heading off in the morning, but for those that know me, I tend not to go to bed early, so there'll be plenty of opportunity for having a good yarn. Yeah.
Is there anything burning?
Kevin, I'm sure you're aware there are a lot of lifestyle blocks with a few deer on them with no facilities. Have you assessed the risk of these herds for TB?
We're currently doing it, Colin, and it'll be the basis of going through almost like that matrix that I talked about. Are they in a risk area? Have they been associated with previous infection? Have they got movement risk? If all of those are clearly negative, then probably forget about them. Yeah.
Yeah, it's John Samuel here. Has got a question on the TB testing. There's quite a lot of assumptions in the new TB testing. I see you had up there about pre-test clipping.
Yep.
They haven't been told the animal's going to be pre-test clipped, are they, in their tendering process? And also the fact we've been a user pay system for so long, and farmers have developed systems over the last 30 odd years. Suddenly when farmers realise it's being paid for, some farmers mightn't be so interested in making the process fast, as they have in the past. So have those assumptions been built into the pricing?
So anticipating that question, I spoke to the management of both testing companies yesterday about the exact point. One of them says that clipping, and those of you who know, if you're involved with them, that's just automatically part of their service at the moment. It's built into the cost. And the other company says the same, particularly those that they're subcontracting to. it's part of the deal. It has to be done. Clipping's a requirement for doing a good, accurate TB test. So, again, as I said, that needs to be, if you've had a change in who's doing your testing, it needs to be a discussion before you do your testing with your new contractor about making sure that that's absolutely clear who's doing what. So it's not left that, he was doing it, she was doing it, and you're left with nothing.
Yeah, hi Kevin, Richard Curry here.
Richard.
I'd be interested to know your rationale or justification for recording TB tests down to an individual animal level.
So there's two things. As you probably see, most of our focus is going to be in our movement control areas where we will be doing annual testing and pre-movement testing. At the moment, and people then apply they move animals subject to testing. We've got no record at the moment that that's actually been done, apart from a test record that 270, weaners were tested, or let's say, calves, and 50 of those were moved. There's only an assumption that these were part of the ones that were done. So it's being able to verify that a lot better, but also the other point is that within a year, we'll be moving to a disease database that is individual animal based. So again, a TB test will be just a treatment or whatever you want to call it. It'll be something applied to an individual animal. So at the moment, the files that will be collected by scanning are going to be stored separately, but ultimately they'll be migrated into as I said, getting to the stage with TB anyway, that this is beginning to be an individual animal based disease.
Right, last one, I think we better keep moving. But Kevin, can we ask at the end of the show if you can hang around?
Yeah. As I said, I'm staying for quite a long time. Yeah. No, not to need much sleep. Become like one of those possums, get a bit nocturnal.
Kevin,
Thank you.
just one more question. I don't know whether it was last year or early this year, we received an email from Osprey to say that obviously things were changing as far as a provider goes. Also in that email it said that if looking at deer farmers at Velvet at the same time, that there'd be an opportunity to actually talk to the new provider and possibly use your old provider because of the regime you've had or the management you've had in the past. So I just wondered whether that's still the case.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Things that are outside of the regulatory process of TB testing.
So
that can be whatever. And that's what I said. It's best that if your provider's changed, talk. It's the same with Assure Quality test 50% of the deer market at the moment. They don't do a lot of this other stuff that needs a vet. So you have, they work in with people. It'd be no different. Similar to what
So you're saying that we can possibly go back to our old provider?
No. Oh,
No.
for testing?
For testing?
No.
So what we're doing is we have a situation where some of us velvet probably 3 times a week.
Yeah.
So you're saying that we can actually get a new provider to actually provide that service?
For velveting or?
No, for the testing at the
Yeah.
same time as velveting.
It's a new provider, yeah.
Right.
So whether but you still, the other non-TB testing stuff you do at the same time.
I'm suggesting that's going to be rather expensive, but if they're going to provide that.
Yeah.
Right, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm sorry, we better keep moving.